The congressional committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol is raising a new potential allegation against Donald Trump: witness tampering. And that is another signal the committee is pushing to have Trump charged criminally. As we look live there at the Capitol building, a decision for the U.S. Justice Department. Among the other fresh revelations from that committee yesterday, the former president tried to conceal a plan for his supporters to march on Congress while the election results were being certified. That Trump himself took part in what the testimony describes as an unhinged West Wing meeting in late December. Some of his top advisors there got into a screaming match with Trump associates who wanted to seize voting machines as part of the scheme to declare the election fraudulent and to do so falsely. Committee heard as well from a man who was charged with storming Congress on January the 6th, who testified he now feels duped by Trump and what is now known as the big lie. It was quite a day. And listening into all of it was our next guest, and someone who has graced our program before, back with us this morning. He is a noted Republican strategist, a veteran strategist, an outspoken Republican, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, fierce critic of Donald Trump. Rick Wilson, welcome back to our program from Massachusetts this morning. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Listen, it was a session full of bombshell testimony yesterday. What was the most important thing, though, that you think we learned?
You know, I think the revelation was that they opened up a second wing of this pincer movement coming against Trump. They went through the legal machinations of a group of frankly crazy people who had surrounded Trump and tried to convince him that he could do this. And you saw how the rational actors in the White House slowly but surely fell away, allowing Trump to continue to pursue the organization and the planning of this violent attack on the Capitol. And you saw that they were aware that Trump had lost. He was aware that he had lost. He was, however, a gambler, and he was gambling that this violent attack would somehow reset the chess pieces, would shuffle the deck somehow, and that he would be able to hold on to power. And so we've gotten a lot more clarity from yesterday's hearing on just how much planning went into this and just how much knowledge there was that there was no legal pathway for him to hold power.
So that's interesting. You heard that reflected even in the beginning, the opening statements from co-chair Liz Cheney, when she said, well, in fact, why don't we listen to this particular key passage yesterday, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. Here's Liz Cheney.
The strategy is to blame people his advisors called, quote, the crazies, for what Donald Trump did. This, of course, is nonsense. President Trump is a 76-year-old man. He is not an impressionable child. And Donald Trump cannot escape responsibility by being willfully blind.
So cannot escape responsibility, cannot claim willful blindness. Who was she speaking to there, and what was the message?
Well, I think she was speaking to two audiences, basically. The first audience are the remaining witnesses and the cooperating witnesses so far. The second audience, the most important audience I think she was speaking to, is Merrick Garland, where all of the committee's work basically rests on whether the Justice Department will take these shocking and dangerous revelations and put them into action and prosecute the people that organized, planned, and conspired to execute an overturn of a free and fair American election.
Is that where you think it's going to lead? Do you think are you seeing? I mean, non-lawyer, I don't know if you're a legal background, but not a lawyer. And of course, it's for the lawyers to decide. But as you've watched this, as they've built this case, what are you seeing, whether it's leading inexorably toward that end?
You know, the Justice Department, I've seen, their investigations that they've done and cases they've brought in the past around political matters such as this, well, not such as this, but political matters with a much lower standard of evidence, and I'm shocked they haven't brought more prosecutions yet up the chain. They've been slowly working up, from the bottom up. But I think America is watching, waiting for Merrick Garland and the Justice Department to really go after the people at a senior level who were involved in this. And I think the case is increasingly being made that both the president, his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and other people around him not only were aware of what was coming, but were causing it to happen.
Okay.
And I think folks like Steve Bannon and Roger Stone and Ali Alexander and Alex Jones, we saw yesterday, they played a pivotal role in promoting and organizing this coup.
It'll be so interesting when we get that Steve Bannon testimony we expect to come. You know, we haven't talked, you and I, about this particular matter, certainly not while the committee's been doing its work, but I know you've made it in previous public comments, made it clear that you were actually skeptical initially about the hearings at the outset, about the work that it was going to do. What's your view now?
Look, I think two things happened on the way to where we're at today. First off, there was an internal division in the committee that I was aware of from two people inside that committee. And there was one group that said, this is horrible, but we've just got to get it behind us. And there was another group that said, this is horrible, and we have to focus on it like a laser. And as the hearings began, and America was fascinated by them, and America has been watching these hearings in many, many millions, and the numbers have shocked the committee of how many Americans have been paying attention. And I think they realize that this is a much bigger issue for Americans than they thought. And so it has become now a committee that has been run very well. I think Congresswoman Cheney has done an absolutely outstanding job of showing that there are still Republicans in the world and conservatives in the world who are not willing to engage in supporting a coup, who are not willing to let something like this, a fundamental threat to the American constitutional republic and our democracy, go unassailed. So I think there was a moment where they saw America was interested, and they got, as they say, born again hard.
Well, watching, as you say, by the millions, and there'll be more primetime hearings to come. We're seeing perhaps some effect in recent polling numbers, because if I want to get your sense on how much this has weakened Donald Trump's hold on the Republican Party, New York Times and Siena College just released a poll showing that in this poll, anyway, nearly half of the respondents and the party's primary voters are going to be seeking someone different for president in 2024. What do you think the effect has had on, as I said, on Trump's stranglehold?
I think it has weakened Donald Trump with a group of Republicans that my organization, the Lincoln Project, has targeted in the last 3 years. And that group was more educated, more suburban, more affluent Republicans who were never comfortable with Trump, but who made in 2016 a sort of accommodation in their minds and said, oh, well, it's either Trump or Hillary. I might as well swallow hard and see if it works out. And we discovered we could talk to those people and move those voters. That group is expanding. That cohort is expanding. You are seeing right now the rise of Ron DeSantis, who's the hot flavor in the Republican Party now. You're seeing the increasing organization of Republican campaigns by people like Nikki Haley. Ted Cruz is putting his toe back in the water, quite obviously. Greg Abbott in Texas is telling people he's going to run and keep their powder dry. There is a growing number of Republicans who don't fear Trump in the same way they did before.
Right.
However, Donald Trump still commands the fanatic loyalty of 35% of the party. And these are people this is a jihadi level of loyalty where it is blind, that cannot be moved. The committee could show that Trump murdered somebody and they'd be like, oh, well. So I think they're going to
even heard that. We heard that yesterday from one of the witnesses who said it's time for people to take the blinders off, was what the actual phrase that Stephen Ayers used. But even though there are those thousands of diehard supporters still, and you still have Republicans in Congress who either profess to support or at least refuse to denounce, I mean, how do you explain that? How do you get to them?
Well, you can't get to them right now. You still can't get to them. We've studied this matter. We studied this matter from 2015 on in focus groups and in voter testing and in polling and every other method and psychological profiling and everything else. There is a group of people, again, that hard 35%, that will be with Donald Trump no matter what. They believe it with a religious fervor that cannot be shattered at this moment. And we've tried every possible message to break those people off, which is why we tend to communicate with those Republicans who are more on the center right than on the Trump right. And Heather, it is a difficult psychological moment to break away from a cultish movement like that. And Stephen Ayers yesterday, there were a lot of people on the left who were kind of mocking him and, oh, the silly haircut, he's a lower class guy. But I actually admired him tremendously because he did something very, very brave. He did take the blinders off. He did stop following all the crazy conspiratorial social media. And he went up and he did something that 30 or 40 members in the White House staff who knew this attack was coming did not do. He spoke the truth. And he put it out there and he said, I was wrong. It's a powerful, cathartic kind of moment to see that happen to somebody. And I think his bravery was an example to people, even folks who are on what looks like the edge right now.
Yes.
They can say, wait a minute, do I really believe that the country should be sacrificed just for an electoral outcome in the short term for one man? And I thought it was a really, sort of inspirational moment for folks who were watching the hearings yesterday.
Rick Wilson, thank you for your perspective. I'll look
Thank you.
forward
That's
to
always
another conversation. Really enjoy our time together. And next time, the next chapter of these hearings, we'll be back in touch. Rick Wilson from Massachusetts with us this morning.